We have a lot of interesting things to talk about today, but I also want to talk about the inflation numbers that came out a few days ago. So I want to really target that and make you guys understand why it's important to you, how these numbers can be extremely damaging to your well-being, to you building a future, to you building your family. And that's what we are concerned about most over here, right? Our loved ones, our family, putting a roof on top of their head, putting steak on their freaking plates, and enjoying our lives together, not just freaking building the bank account and doing nothing with it. Right, so now I'm hoping that this mini presentation is going to help you guys understand the implications of not being proactive, right, with your wealth and your savings over the next at least half a decade. Things may actually pan out for the entire 10 years, or could happen a lot quicker. So we're going to start with little Google Sheets. Let me know if you guys want me to share this with you, and you guys can go ahead and play around with it. So what we have over here is essentially on the top left hand corner, us assuming we have $100,000 worth of savings. And right over here on the right hand side, I have the current inflation numbers that have just come out. CPI readings were at 6.2%. And that, in my opinion, is undershot by a long margin. In fact, some calculation methods where you smooth out the inflation numbers actually come up to like 7.5. Now people are thinking, what is 6.2%? What is the big deal, right? What is the big deal? Over here underneath, I have a table of the years that have elapsed and with the current inflation numbers, okay, considering it stays steady and does not increase, as much as politicians are saying that, hey, these inflation numbers are transitionary, they're not going to increase, they have been increasing every single month. If things stay steady at an average of 6%, okay, what this table is telling you is that even though normally your bank account or your salary, okay, your salary as a employee is going to say $100,000, your real purchasing power on consumer goods, not things that you really want to buy, the Fed thinks that you should be buying just to survive as a human being, after the first year, Kusha, it's going to drop down to around 93,000. After the second year, it's going to go down to 87,000. Now these years begin to creep up on people. In 10 years, you pretty much lose half of your purchasing power. It's done. Okay, so if you don't get a raise of 6% a year every year to keep up with this inflation rate, okay, or if your savings account in your bank is not keeping up with that 6% interest rate, you are losing half your purchasing power within 10 years. This is considering the inflation rate does not skyrocket. And this is considering inflation rate is at what it is, which it is not, by the way, okay? On average, the S&P has been increasing by 14%. Yeah. In fact, a lot of measures coincidentally have lined up with that 14% measurement of inflation rate. And also, if you calculate it using the way the Fed used to calculate inflation rate back before they kept changing it, is actually 14%. So essentially they keep changing the way they calculate CPI based on what they think consumers should be buying, all right? And you can't, as a independent human being, okay, as someone especially who is part of the Mango community, where we are we like to empower people to make their own decisions, right? You can't have somebody else decide what your inflation rate is. Does it, like, let's say you have everything else in order and your primary concern is buying a new house, right? Does this 6% inflation rate make sense to many of you guys in North America? If your primary concern is just to buy the S&P index on an annual basis, does it make sense that CPI is your inflation rate, your personal inflation rate is setting at 6%? No. The Fed's goal right now is essentially to let inflation run high, and I've been saying this over and over again since the beginning of the year. The goal is to let inflation run high while they keep saying, no, inflation's going to be fine, we're going to keep it down. They actually want to let it run high. Why? Everything can be broken down into first principles, guys, right? When they owe trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars, how do they get out of this mess in order to actually be able to increase interest rates later? To let inflation rate run hot for the next freaking 5 to 10 years so that they can essentially cut down how much they really owe by this amount. That's what they want. They wanted to in real value drop to by huge numbers, right? Normally, all the debt holders, all the bond holders will feel good about themselves, but in purchasing power, they are going to get wrecked. But a better way to look at things, guys, is at the current interest rate, at the current inflation rate rather, when do I lose half of my purchasing power, right? And I have that calculation right over here too for you guys. It says 5 years. At 14%, which is the bare minimum inflation rate in my opinion. Okay, 14 to 15% is what the true inflation rate is at the moment. No matter what this number is, by the way, whether it's 100,000 or 200,000, it doesn't matter. Your half-life of your money with the inflation rate currently is 5 years. 5 years, Kusha. That's it. Okay, you can see it right over here on the table. Yeah. If you have $200,000. After 5 years, you're going to be left with only $94,000 of purchasing power, guys. The people who really suffer are the hardworking wage earners, the community that we have over here. We are the people who suffer over the next 10 years because we don't know any better, right? So our job over here at Mango Research is to educate you guys enough to inform you in a way that you can make the right decisions to protect your wealth. And I want to go ahead and show a tad bit of this report by ARK Invest. This was written all the way back in September. And I really recommend you guys read this article too. I can link it down. I will link it down in the description. So right over here, in the face of unpredictable changes in monetary policy, it is the individuals, not the institutions, not the big mega corps, it's the individuals who typically have to grapple with the fallout. It's because institutional investors are going to go ahead and buy assets, right? And corporations are going to just increase prices on the individuals to make up for any monetary inflation that takes place because of government bad policy. That's why ultimately we pay the buck. They then go on to say, if a central bank mismanages its country's money supply, fiat money can lose its purchasing power due to inflation, which is what we've been talking about throughout this presentation, if not hyperinflation. Now, this highlight over here is really important, guys. In the last century, guys, so over the last 100 years, 3 monetary policy changes cascaded, cutting the purchasing power of almost half of the world's currency by 50%. Understand that, fathom that. Over the last 100 years alone, more than half of the world's countries have lost purchasing power by more than half. Okay, and there's a beautiful chart over here, really nice chart posted. Essentially, it's showing the past 200 years essentially. Okay, on the x-axis. Okay, that's the x-axis. On the y-axis, it's showing the percent of countries. Okay, percent of countries that have lost half of its purchasing power due to bad monetary policy. So you guys can see that from 1804 to around the 1900s, before the Fed was actually created. Okay, we didn't have that many countries losing its purchasing power, right? So over here you can see a slight spike, but it reached only 15%. So only 15% of all the world's countries lost more than half of its purchasing power. Right. Ever since the Fed was created, okay, ever since we gave up monetary control, okay, to the Fed, you can see the spikes over here. You can see how often it was happening. Half the countries in the world lost 50% of its purchasing power. Okay, this was after the Fed was created. Then after the enactment of the Gold Reserve Act, the Gold Reserve was enacted for the same reasons we had the huge money printing for the COVID response, the COVID crisis response. Mm-hmm. It's the same reasons, to increase the money supply, to avoid massive deflation. And again, similar situation in 1939, that Fed over there was dealt a bad hand and they had to act accordingly. And to avoid what would have taken place because of the Great Depression, they had to increase the money supply, right? But look at what happened after that. The purchasing power of half the world, that was cascading onto all the countries in the world, guys, all the countries in the world. The leading power that does this, right? The reserve currency of the world that does it ends up weakening all the other countries. Yeah. And look what happened after the Gold Reserve Act was enacted. More than 50% of the world's currencies again lost half its purchasing power. Again, guys, this was compounded on the previous, right? And then again, it happened on the complete abandonment of the gold standard in 1973, right? Again, the world lost half of its purchasing power. And now it seems like we're due for another episode of that. I do recommend all of you guys read Lords of Finance. It's a very, very in-depth, long, heavy read. It's definitely worth it though. If you guys are into history, it really allows you to get into the mind of all the central bankers during the Great Depression and why they did what they did, how they were doing it, and even the central bankers back then, guys. Okay, they believed that gold was going to be a check on governments being forced to have good monetary policy. Now, in an ideal world, we could live with a fiat standard where we can trust humans to act responsibly, but we cannot. We need something to keep a check on our monetary policy. Unfortunately, gold was too restrictive in many ways. Bitcoin, on the other hand, can be that check, right? So yeah, and by the way, this article by ARK Invest, okay, who are very forward thinking, is actually named Bitcoin a novel economic institution, right? They believe that Bitcoin, I really recommend reading this article, but they believe that Bitcoin can actually be the fixing force of the current problems that the world has.
Could be like a foundational layer of sorts in this world. And we need that, right? Because I mean, it's the fact that the Fed has so much control over the money supply, and they're basically holding the throttle there. And what Bitcoin does is that there's a fixed supply. Try messing around with that, you cannot.
Yep.
Right? So there's very, very less room for corruption within that system, within the Bitcoin foundational layer there.
If you guys want me to break down this, do a separate video just breaking down this article for you guys, because I know a lot of you guys are really, really busy. If you guys want me to break this report down for you guys, okay, just dedicate on this report, let me know in the comments down below. Not just in the chat, guys, let me know in the chat too, but take the effort to leave a comment underneath, and that way, depending on the response that we get, I'll go ahead and spend the time to make a dedicated video just on this. Let me know if you guys want me to share this inflation rate decay and half-life chart with you guys too. You guys can go ahead and play around with it. You guys can say that, hey, if I just keep my money doing nothing, my USD doing nothing, then in 3 years I'm going to be able to buy half of the things I like to buy or I want to buy, right? And that is scary. That is scary. This is what's causing a lot of people to just invest willy-nilly. It's leading to malinvestment because they're like, I cannot keep it here. Because when your default risk is 20%, right? You're like, damn, by default, I'm losing 20% at the end of the year. I'd rather put it anywhere and just, try to keep up with the true inflation rate. At least have an asset that is limited in supply. Okay, with that, guys, I think we can switch to the charts. And